Welcome. Today, our focus is a very serious examination of the source material related to Nikko Jenkins, the spree killer responsible for 4 murders in Omaha, Nebraska, back in August of 2013.
And the documents we're looking at, they really outline a case that touches on, well, on so many things: legal questions, psychology, and what many have called systemic failure.
Absolutely. We're going to analyze the facts of just a massive surge of violence. 4 people killed within just 10 days of Jenkins' release from prison.
That timeline is so critical, it really defines the entire case. Our goal here is to stick to the documented chronology, to look at the motives he stated, the complex legal arguments about his mental state, and the really shocking involvement of his family.
Our mission is to review this material systematically, to sort of guide you through the most important and often the most challenging insights. We want to understand the documented path of his life that led to that release. So let's begin there, with his history of involvement with the correctional and mental health systems, which, according to every record, began almost immediately.
Yeah, that's really the only place to start.
Nikko Allen Jenkins was born on September 16, 1986, in Denver, Colorado. His parents were David A. McGee and Lori Jenkins. What really stands out in the source material, right away, is that this path to tragedy wasn't a gradual thing. It wasn't minor offenses escalating. It was a history of severe behavioral issues from the very beginning.
That history it's a critical element, especially when we get to the lawsuit he filed later, where he argued the state was responsible. The sources just paint this picture of someone whose problems were aggressive and alarming from an incredibly young age.
And we're not talking about teenage rebellion here.
No, we are talking about major signs of deeply entrenched issues.
Give us an example, a specific one, of just how early these problems started, because it really does set the stage for everything that follows.
Well, one of the most shocking facts in the documentation is that at the age of 7, he brought a loaded handgun to school.
7 years old. 7. And, this isn't typical juvenile delinquency. This is a clear, documented act of extreme danger, a huge indicator of conduct disorder, well before he's even in double digits.
And when you look at that early failure of intervention, it just raises so many questions. What resources were available? If the state knows a 7-year-old brought a loaded weapon to school, what is supposed to happen next?
And why did those interventions, whatever they were, ultimately fail to change his path? That's a question that hangs over this entire case.
Because that incident, and whatever followed, clearly wasn't enough. By November of 2003, he's 17 years old, and the sources record his conviction for armed robbery.
And that really marks his formal entry into the adult criminal justice system. A very premature entry, but that's what leads to his first long-term incarceration.
This conviction, it initiated this decade-long cycle of imprisonment that really defined the next part of his life. Exactly. He was given a substantial sentence, 18 years, for a carjacking conviction. But it's really essential to note that his time in prison, it wasn't quiet, it wasn't compliant. He was also convicted for numerous assaults that he committed inside the prison walls.
So his confinement itself was characterized by more violence.
Ongoing, severe behavioral resistance. Violence towards staff, violence toward other inmates. This is critical to understanding his mindset.
And so he ends up serving 10.5 years of that initial 18-year sentence. Given all the internal assaults and the length of the sentence, the sources detail this environment where he's constantly monitored, but he's also constantly acting out.
And there's one specific incident. It happened in 2009 that really demonstrates his propensity for violence. And it also shows, chillingly, that his family was already involved in his criminal activities.
This was during a funeral, right?
That's right. His grandmother had passed away. He was granted a temporary escorted leave from prison to attend the funeral. He was with corrections officers, very high security.
Understandably.
And the sources detail this one specific moment.
Yeah.
A guard uncuffed one of Nikko's hands so he could use the restroom. And in that instant, he and his sister, Nikko Jenkins,
who was also there.
She was also incarcerated and also attending the funeral. And they simultaneously attack the guard in an attempt to escape.
The coordination of that it's noteworthy. They're both serving time, they're under strict supervision, and yet they conspire and act together during this high-risk transport.
It speaks volumes, it really does, about the level of familial collusion in these criminal acts, and it foreshadows the much more devastating events that we're going to cover.
I assume the escape attempt failed.
It did. They were restrained. But it absolutely put the prison system on notice about the dangerous lengths he and his sister would go to for freedom, even during a funeral service. But despite all that, the bureaucratic path of his sentence just kept moving forward.
And that path led directly to the critical date we have to focus on, July 30th, 2013. Because of mandatory sentencing guidelines and time served, Nikko Jenkins was released from the Nebraska Department of Correctional Services.
And that transition, going from total incarceration for a decade characterized by violence and unstable behavior, to just absolute freedom. It was catastrophic.
The sources confirm the time between his release and the start of the killings was what?
Incredibly short, a mere 11 days. He was released on July 30th, and the murder spree began on August 11th.
That speed, that immediacy of the violence is really the defining feature of this case. And it's exactly what fueled the argument in his later lawsuit that the system knew or should have known he was an immediate threat.
Exactly.
But before we get deeper into all the legal implications, we have to address the devastating impact of those next 10 days in Omaha.
It was a terrifying time for the city.
So we're transitioning now into the rapid and chilling sequence of events. The sources map out 4 separate murder scenes in Omaha over a very brief period in August 2013, which plunged the entire community into terror.
And the initial attacks were characterized by just extreme randomness. The spree started on August 11th, 2013, just those few days after his release. The first victims were discovered by a patrol officer in the very early morning hours.
These were Juan Rivapena, who's 26, and Jorge C. Cajiga Ruiz, who was 29. What were the exact circumstances, according to the source material, of their deaths?
They were found shortly after 5 a.m. inside a white Ford pickup truck. The truck was parked near a city swimming pool at 18th and F Street in a place called Spring Lake Park.
And the method? The
method of killing was a shotgun. Each man had been shot once in the head. And the detail noted in the reports is, it's incredibly grim. Mr. Cajiga Ruiz's wound went through his hand before it entered his head.
Suggesting he might have raised his hand to try and defend himself.
A final futile attempt. That's the implication.
And what about the motive? Did they have any known connection to Jenkins?
Absolutely none. The sources indicate this was a completely opportunistic crime. The victims were reportedly lured to that location by 2 women who were possibly associates of Jenkins under the pretense of a sexual encounter.
And robbery was involved.
Definitely. Crucially, their pockets were found turned inside out. That indicates that robbery was a key factor in this initial double murder. It set the immediate tone for the whole spree. Random, ruthless, and just highly violent.
And then, exactly 8 days later, on August 19, 2013, the violence starts again, this time with the murder of Curtis Bradford.
Yes, and this victim is different from the others. He stands apart because Curtis Bradford actually knew Nikko Jenkins.
Bradford was 22. He was found around 7 a.m. outside a detached garage near 18th and Clark Street, and their connection was from prison.
Yes, it was institutional. They had met while they were both incarcerated, and the source materials have a truly chilling detail about their relationship.
What's that?
They had posed together for a Facebook photograph within 24 hours of Bradford's murder.
Wow. That suggests a calculated familiarity, a betrayal that wasn't there in the first killings. And the method used here was also distinct, wasn't it?
It was. Very unique. And it suggests either a level of disorganized rage or maybe just him using whatever weapons were on hand. Bradford was shot twice in the back of the head.
Okay.
But with 2 different weapons. One wound was from a revolver, and the other was from a heavy shotgun slug.
And the documented motive here is more complex, too. It involves not just Nikko, but his sister, Erica, as well.
Yes, let's get into her suspected involvement, based on the source material. It's believed that Nikko and Erica Jenkins lured Bradford out, and the initial plan was robbery.
But there was more to it.
The sources strongly suggest that Erica had a personal motive for wanting Bradford dead. She allegedly held a grudge because some of his friends had previously shot at her house.
So this murder was a combination of things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Opportunistic robbery mixed with a calculated personal revenge. And it was executed with the help of his sister, who, as we'll discuss, later faced very serious charges for her role in it.
And then, just 48 hours after Curtis Bradford's death, the spree tragically concludes with the 4th and final victim, Andrea Kruger. And it's essential here, given the circumstances, to approach this with appropriate respect and sympathy. She was a mother of 3, just trying to get home from work.
Yes. The randomness of this one is particularly devastating. Andrea Kruger was 33. She was discovered on August 21st, 2013, around 2:15 in the morning by a deputy sheriff who was responding to a call about shots fired.
And she was found. Where?
In the middle of the road, near 168th and 4th Street. Surveillance footage from the Deja Vu Lounge where she worked as a bartender showed her locking up and leaving just before 1:50 a.m.
So the timeline is, it's tragically tight.
Extremely tight. It confirmed she was targeted almost immediately after leaving her job.
What were the specific injuries that investigators documented for Ms. Kruger?
She was killed with multiple 9mm gunshot wounds, 4 in total. The reports indicate 2 shots to the face, 1 to the neck, and 1 to the shoulder or back area.
And then her car was stolen.
Yes. Following the murder, her vehicle, a gold 2012 Chevrolet Traverse SUV, was stolen. And the search for that vehicle became a really crucial part of the investigation that followed.
Where did they eventually find it?
It was found about 12 miles away, abandoned in an alley, and investigators noted a detail that suggested an attempt to destroy evidence. They described it as a feeble attempt to set the interior of the SUV on fire.
So her murder, like that initial double homicide, was purely random.
Purely random, targeting an unsuspecting person who was just doing the ordinary task of returning home from work. And this randomness, combined with the speed of the killings, 4 people in 10 days, it absolutely gripped the entire Omaha community with fear.
The sources really outline this pattern of extreme violence, opportunistic robbery, sometimes personal vengeance, all of it executed with heavy weaponry, shotgun slugs, handguns, in this very condensed time frame by a man who had been released from state custody less than 2 weeks earlier.
Which brings us to the inevitable investigation that followed.
As the community was panicking, investigators were under just tremendous pressure to connect these 4 separate crime scenes. The Douglas County Sheriff had even publicly acknowledged they were dealing with a spree killer. So let's talk about how the evidence started to come together, which ultimately led to Jenkins's arrest on August 29th, 2013, just 8 days after that final murder.
The breakthrough in the investigation really relied on linking the physical evidence, particularly the ammunition. The sources highlight how distinctive the shotgun rounds were that were used in the first double murder and in the killing of Curtis Bradford.
And what were they?
Investigators identified them as a very specific type. Brennecke Classic Magnum 12-gauge deer slugs.
That is an incredibly specific type of round. That must have helped narrow down the source quite a bit.
It absolutely did. They used that information to go through surveillance footage from local gun shops and sporting goods stores, and that footage successfully captured a female associate of Jenkins purchasing this precise, distinctive ammunition.
And that provided the crucial link.
A huge linkage, yes. It placed people directly connected to Jenkins in possession of the ammunition for the murder weapons just before the spree began.
So once they had that lead, how did they connect Jenkins himself specifically to the final victim, to Andrea Kruger, who was killed during the carjacking?
Well, the second major breakthrough was the use of high-resolution security cameras. They were positioned along the vehicle's escape route. These images captured Kruger's stolen gold SUV as it was driven away, and they tracked its path all the way to the alley where it was abandoned.
So the combination of the ammunition trace and the vehicle tracking was key.
Exactly. The sources indicate that this evidence, combined with information they were getting from associates, allowed police to place Jenkins and his co-conspirators in the immediate vicinity of the crimes.
And he was initially arrested on a different charge.
That's right. On August 29th, he was arrested on an unrelated charge of making terroristic threats. But by that point, the police had a very solid evidentiary framework linking him directly to the 4 murders.
And that arrest then paves the way for the critical turning point in the case. The confession.
Yes. On September 3, 2013, just a few days after he was arrested, Jenkins participated in a very extensive 8-hour interview with police.
8 hours?
It was a rambling, disjointed session, but during it, he provided details and he admitted to committing all 4 murders. And this confession was absolutely essential. It tied him directly to the victims and the crimes, and it paved the way for the formal charges.
But what stands out most, and this becomes absolutely central to the legal fight later on, is the motive he provided. It wasn't simple greed or revenge for all 4 killings.
No, it was an extraordinary and immediately controversial claim. Jenkins told the police that the acts were not committed for any standard criminal reasons. He said they were ritualistic sacrifices.
Oh, sacrifice.
Carried out at the command of an ancient serpent god, Apophis, a deity from ancient Egyptian religion who was known as the embodiment of chaos and darkness.
This immediately shifts the entire narrative. It goes from a standard, though horrific, spree killing to a case that's deeply entangled in claims of religious delusion or a psychotic break.
Exactly. And Jenkins made sure this narrative was part of the public and legal record. The sources document handwritten letters he sent out, dated November 3rd, 2013. He addressed them to the Omaha World-Herald, to the prosecutors, and to the judge.
What did he say in these letters?
He reiterated his allegiance to Apophis. He volunteered to plead guilty to all the charges. He claimed he was vowed to protect Apophis's kingdom with animalistic, savage brutality.
And he tied this alleged divine command directly to his own body, didn't he?
He did. He claimed that the command voices instructing him to kill matched specific phrases he had tattooed on his face. He claimed they translated to the imperative, kill them, destroy them, attack them.
So he's explicitly linking self-mutilation, this claimed religious delusion, and the murders themselves.
Yes. And that immediately forced the legal system to grapple with the central question of the entire case. Was this genuine psychosis? Or was this a calculated strategy to avoid responsibility?
Which brings us squarely to the core of the legal debate. The whole process became this intricate, lengthy battle over his state of mind and his capacity to even understand the legal proceedings against him.
And the legal proceedings, they started with an incredibly unusual development. On February 19, 2014, the confessed murderer, Nikko Jenkins, filed a federal lawsuit against the very state that was prosecuting him.
A murderer suing the state for $24.5 million. On what grounds did he base this claim of wrongful release?
Well, in this 6-page handwritten filing, Jenkins argued that corrections officials were directly responsible for the 4 murders.
That's so.
Because, he claimed, they had repeatedly ignored his pleas for help, his claims of hearing voices, and his increasingly erratic behavior while he was incarcerated. He contended that his lengthy time in solitary confinement had worsened his supposed schizophrenia.
So, therefore, the state's negligence in failing to heed those warnings was the direct cause of the deaths.
That was his argument. It's a fascinating legal maneuver, isn't it? He's simultaneously claiming that the voices of Apophis compelled him to commit the murders, and that the state allowed the murders to happen by ignoring the fact that the voices were compelling him.
It immediately raises the central issue of his mental state.
It does. The court had to determine if these claims were indicative of a true mental illness that would make him incompetent to stand trial. That would prevent the state from moving forward, especially with a death penalty case.
And Jenkins himself claimed a number of disorders.
He did. Schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder. So the judge ordered a court-appointed psychiatric evaluation.
The finding of that evaluation is absolutely crucial to understanding the outcome of this entire case. What did the professional evaluators determine?
This is where the medical and legal records clash directly with Jenkins' claims. The psychiatric team concluded that Jenkins did not suffer from the serious psychotic disorders he claimed, like schizophrenia. Instead, the finding was that he had antisocial personality disorder, or APD, and that he was feigning psychotic symptoms.
Okay, let's unpack that distinction. What exactly did the psychiatrists mean by concluding he was feigning psychotic symptoms? And how does antisocial personality disorder, which they did diagnose, differ so critically from schizophrenia in a legal context?
Well, antisocial personality disorder, APD, it's a diagnosis that focuses on a pervasive pattern of disregard for the rights of others. It often involves deceit, manipulation, a lack of remorse. It aligns with what we might commonly term sociopathy or psychopathy.
And in the court's view, a person with APD is manipulative but knows right from wrong.
Exactly. They are fully capable of knowing the rules of society. They just choose not to adhere to them. Schizophrenia, on the other hand, involves a genuine break from reality. A person is unable to form rational judgments. They truly believe their delusions, and that could potentially make them incompetent.
So the finding of feigning means the court determined his claims about Apophis, and the command voices were a deliberate attempt to deceive everyone.
Precisely. To deceive the professionals and the court, most likely to avoid a conviction, or, specifically, the death penalty.
And the evaluation laid this out.
It did. It determined that his self-reported symptoms were inconsistent, they were often vague, and they didn't follow the established clinical pattern of a genuine psychotic illness. He was deemed a manipulative offender who was using the language of mental illness as a legal shield.
And what about his IQ? The sources mention a specific score.
They do. He scored a 68 on an administered IQ test, which does place him in the range of intellectual disability. But despite that, he was ultimately declared competent to stand trial, because he was found to understand the charges against him and the consequences of the proceedings. The legal standard isn't about high intelligence, it's about basic comprehension of the process.
So the finding of competency allowed the trial to move forward, but Jenkins's behavior only grew more disruptive.
It escalated. He chose to represent himself, with advisory attorneys on hand, and he basically turned the courtroom into a stage for his alleged psychosis.
This decision really just amplified the chaos.
Completely. Throughout the proceedings, he maintained his stance that he was being commanded by Apophis. His courtroom behavior was sensational, and it was clearly intended to undermine the dignity of the court, likely as part of his strategy to reinforce this image of a mentally broken man.
What specifically did he do?
The sources document him speaking in tongues, howling uncontrollably, and most disturbingly, laughing loudly and hysterically as the prosecutors were recounting the graphic, painful details of how the victims died.
That kind of disruption, it must have been incredibly taxing for the court and just devastating for the victims' families who were present.
Unimaginable for them. And this also ties into the consistent documentation we have of his self-harm.
Right. The pattern of self-mutilation was relentless. It seemed to complicate the competency debate even further.
It did. The sources confirm numerous instances of self-harm while he was in custody. He specifically targeted his face, his tongue, and even his groin area. These acts often required emergency medical attention and numerous stitches.
And this behavior served a purpose for him.
It likely served two purposes. First, to draw attention, and second, to support the narrative that he was genuinely insane and therefore mentally incapable of controlling his actions or even assisting in his own defense.
But despite all the tactics and the disruptions, the judge eventually had to reach a verdict.
Yes. On April 16, 2014, Judge Peter Bataillon found Nikko Jenkins guilty of all 4 counts of first-degree murder. But the legal journey was still far from over, because the sentencing phase immediately stalled due to renewed questions over his mental state.
And this raises a very important distinction: the difference between being competent to stand trial and being competent to be executed.
That's a critical legal nuance, especially in capital cases. Competence to stand trial means you understand the charges and can assist your attorney. Competence to be executed, or to understand the penalty, means the individual has to understand why they're being sentenced to death and the finality of that sentence.
So Jenkins's ongoing claims of delusion and command voices forced the court to revisit this second competency standard.
They had to. Judge Bataillon ordered Jenkins to be housed and treated at the Lincoln Regional Center, which is a state psychiatric hospital. The goal was for doctors to stabilize him until they were satisfied that he understood the sentence he was facing.
But that didn't happen as planned.
No. The regional center officials actually refused to accept him.
Why would a state psychiatric facility refuse a patient ordered there by the court?
Security concerns. Pure and simple. Jenkins was known for extreme violence, for escape attempts like the one at the 2009 funeral, and just highly volatile behavior. The regional center determined their facility lacked the specialized, high-security measures needed to safely contain a convicted capital murderer of his profile.
That refusal speaks volumes about the danger they perceived him to be.
It really does. Ultimately, doctors did agree to provide treatment, but they were forced to do it at a maximum security unit within a Lincoln prison, not in the hospital environment that was originally intended.
And after all of this legal maneuvering and questions over his mental state, the final sentence was delivered.
Yes, after nearly 3 more years. In May of 2017, the 3-judge panel sentenced Jenkins to death.
Specifics.
4 consecutive death sentences, 1 for each victim, plus an additional 450 years for all the weapons charges connected to the murders.
And his appeals.
His final significant challenge in the federal courts, which argued that the death penalty violated his rights because of his alleged mental status, was dismissed. The U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear his appeal in April 2020, and that upheld both conviction and the sentence.
The extreme violence of Nikko Jenkins really dominated the headlines. But the sources make it explicitly clear that these crimes were not the actions of just a single person. This criminal network extended deep into his immediate family.
That's right. We need to analyze the scale of this ripple effect. It involves 6 family members who were apprehended in late August of 2013, all of them facing charges related to the spree.
This systemic familial complicity it's essential for understanding the context here. It shows that Jenkins had immediate, active support for what he was doing.
Exactly. Logistical help, getaway drivers, even direct participation in murder. Let's start with his sister, Erica Jenkins. Her involvement, as we know, dates back to at least that attempted escape in 2009.
And Erica Jenkins was charged and convicted for her role in the shooting death of Curtis Bradford.
That's right. She was sentenced to life in prison, but her conduct while in custody is also documented in the sources.
And it mirrored her brother's.
It did. Very disruptive tendencies. The sources document that while she was incarcerated, she formally changed her name to the highly unusual and lengthy moniker Illuminati e-goddess Nikko Prestige.
But more significantly, she continued her pattern of violence even inside the prison walls.
She did. She was charged with assault after attacking her own cousin, Christine Bordeaux, while they were both in jail.
And the weapon used in that assault was particularly crude, which kind of highlights the improvised danger inside the correctional system.
Absolutely. The attack involved a heavy bike lock that was put inside a sock and swung. It just demonstrates a consistent, defiant nature toward institutional rules and a willingness to engage in violence against both outsiders and her own family members.
Now let's turn to their mother, Lori Jenkins. She wasn't at the scenes of the murders, but her role was instrumental, according to the investigation.
Yes, Lori Jenkins was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison, and her specific crime was purchasing the ammunition used in the slayings.
The deer slugs.
The very specific Brennecke Classic Magnum 12-gauge deer slugs. As we discussed, investigators were able to trace them back through surveillance footage directly to her.
That logistical support is so crucial. It shows a mother actively facilitating the means of death for her son. This is more than just passive protection. It's active enablement.
It is active, and it is necessary enablement. Without that specific deadly ammunition, the initial double murder and the killing of Curtis Bradford could not have been executed in the way they were. Her sentence really underscores the severity with which the courts viewed her direct role in arming a spree killer.
And finally, we need to cover the other key accomplices who received substantial sentences.
Right. We have Christine Bordeaux, the cousin, who was later assaulted by Erica in jail. She was sentenced to 20 years for robbery connected with the slayings. The sources indicate she was involved in the planning and execution of some of the accompanying felonies.
And what about Warren Levering, Nikko's uncle?
Warren Levering received a very significant term, 40 years in prison. And that was for his specific role in the murder of Andrea Kruger, the final victim.
So his involvement was substantial.
The sentence suggests he provided more than just logistical support, possibly involving transportation or active participation in the carjacking and the attempted cover-up afterward. The sheer breadth of the sentences handed down to the family, from 10 years to 20 to 40 to life, it paints a very clear picture of a coordinated, highly functional criminal network operating around Nikko Jenkins.
It's a devastating picture of a family unit that actively contributed to the ability of a newly released convict to conduct one of the state's most horrific killing sprees.
If we synthesize the vast amount of information we have in these sources, the core tension of the entire case, it remains fixed on that conflict between the psychiatric findings and the subject's own behavior.
On one side, you have the documented reality of severe, lifelong antisocial and violent behavior. That led to the formal diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder.
Right, which suggests a cold, calculating criminal mind capable of advanced manipulation.
And on the other side, constantly challenging that, is this bizarre, self-generated narrative of religious or psychotic claims. The command voices, the ritualistic need to commit sacrifices for the servant god Apophis.
And the legal system was forced to be the ultimate arbiter, trying to reconcile this brutal, tangible violence with these intangible alleged delusions.
The court's ultimate ruling that Jenkins was feigning psychotic symptoms is really the central insight.
It is. It means the justice system determined the behavior was a manipulative strategy. It was designed to influence the legal proceedings, particularly the rulings on competency, which, if he had been successful, would have spared him the death penalty.
And the outcome conviction, competency upheld, the death sentence finalized. It shows the court ultimately found the manipulative APD profile stronger than the claims of genuine psychosis.
This tension, it just raises profound questions about accountability and the limits of the state's responsibility. You'll remember, the sources detailed the federal lawsuit Jenkins filed, where he sought millions from the state of Nebraska.
And that lawsuit's central argument was powerful. That state officials were responsible for the killings because they failed to heed repeated, documented warnings about his rapidly deteriorating mental state before his mandatory release in July 2013.
He argued they created the threat by releasing a known, violent, and unstable individual onto the streets.
And this analysis of the source material leads us to a final provocative thought for you to consider. Reflect on the profound implications of that central argument, that state officials were responsible because they ignored his increasingly violent and mentally disturbed behavior. But then hold that argument up against the official court, finding that Jenkins was, in fact, feigning those very psychotic symptoms he claimed were being ignored.
It creates a paradox.
It does. Does the ultimate responsibility lie with the system that was bound by law to release him, or does it lie with the individual who, according to the courts, successfully deceived multiple professionals and used his own history as a calculated weapon? The facts present a very stark conflict between institutional failure and individual accountability.
Thank you for joining us as we systematically examine the source material related to Nikko Jenkins and the Omaha spree killings.
Thanks for listening.